Hi guys, it's Jared with the Cooler Bleeder. Today we're going to do our assembly video to kind of show you the initial setup of the Cooler Bleeder and exactly how everything goes together. So we're going to start with our pot. This is where the vacuum is actually in a reserve per se. This is also where your excess coolant is going to be before it's sucked back into the system. So we're going to start with this. It's what they call a uniseal fitting. They are not designed to be reused over and over and over again. So one of the things you'll hear me often say is once we make this step, I don't like taking it back apart. There is a pretty good chance that this fitting eventually becomes damaged. It's not going to happen on the second or third time, but if you do it 100 different times, eventually we're going to have to replace this. So in order to prevent that or help lessen that risk, we do need to lubricate this. So this is our suction hose. This male end here, there's two ends, not the threaded side, just the male nipple, is going to go into here. We need to lubricate this to start with. So when it's shipped to you, there will be some lubrication on it already. If you do decide to take it out for any reason, we need to make sure that we lubricate it each and every time. So we need to do something that's both plastic and rubber safe. The seal is rubber. Silicone grease or dielectric grease is a really good thing for those. It won't degrade the items. It needs just the smallest amount. So you see what I put there, less than a pea sized. It's not going to take much. Again, there'll be a coating on this already prepared for you when you get it. But if you're taking this in and out, we want to do this each and every time. So we're going to just rub this around the perimeter of this, get a good coating on it. Any excess we can kind of put into the seal as well. You're not going to have it hurt there. And then this is going to press in. One of the keys when doing this is we're not going to twist this hose to get it in. We're going to try to rock it up and down. What I like to call 12 o'clock being the top and 6 o'clock being the bottom. Those are the strong points of the seal. And we're just going to use a little bit of tension and rock it in. And we're going to go in, if you can see here, there's a little bit of a gap. We're going to go until this is flush with the seal, which in that point, we're right there. Now, once it's in, you can do a little bit of rotating because this suction hose is going to have a preformed bend in it per se. It's flexible in all directions, but it's going to have some memory. So if need be, you can twist once it's in. Coming out, not that we're going to do this now, same thing though. We're going to rock between the 12 and 6, and it's going to come out very easily. If you leave this in for a long period of time, it's not going to come out that easily, and that's where the damage is going to be done. So if you do decide to take this apart for storage or otherwise, disassemble it right away. Next time you go in, clean up all this grease, put on a fresh set of or a fresh dab of silicone grease. So again, we are flush right here, and that is step one. So the next thing we're going to need is the silicone ring and the top of the lid. This is going to come with a film on it. I'm not going to peel it today. They don't always have film on it. This really depends on how the manufacturer is shipping them to me. But this ring tends to be a little bit staticky. So you're going to see even right now there's a little bit of just shipping dust and a little hair on there. Rinse this off with some cold water before we do it, just to make sure we have a really nice clean surface. But from there, we're going to peel this film off. And then this seal will wrap on the perimeter of the lid. The nice thing about this too is we're really only going to utilize half of the seal at any given point in time. And I'll show you what I mean by that right now as soon as this is on. So we're on, and that's going to sit just right on top of the vacuum pot like that. This is a flexible enough material that it makes a seal on the outer rim of the pot. So in the future, if ever need be, let's say this gets cut, it gets dropped on the concrete and it's nicked or damaged, you can remove it and just flip it 180 degrees. And basically then you're going to be sealing on the top of it rather than the bottom. So you do get 2 usage out of this. So that's our step one. Get the plastic off, get the perimeter on, get our tube put in place. Our next steps are all going to be around this lid. So I'm going to move this out of the way just so we have a little bit more room. And now we're going to be assembling this. I again like to use the clock. I apologize as for camera angles, but for me this is 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock, just like a clock face. And that's going to help us just orient everything how it's supposed to be set up. From there, we're going to take our gauge. There is going to be an air pocket in it that is totally normal and expected. So remove the nut and the washer from the gauge. And you see there's an O-ring, a green O-ring on this. That is going to stay. You will have a couple extras of those as well there in case they ever get damaged, that you can reuse them or exchange them. So at this point, we're going to take this. This is going to go in the 9 o'clock hole, and it's going to just drop down in there like this. And on the underside, we're going to put the washer, and then we're going to take the nut, thread it on. Now, a very important thing about this, none of these connection points, regardless if we're talking about the gauges or the final connection points later on, have to be extremely tight. Dealing with vacuum is not like dealing with a hydraulic pipe or fitting where we have to have incredible sealing. These are really going to self-seal. So as the system starts to suck, this top seal is actually going to compress and self-seal. So we don't need to be very, very tight on this. But what we're doing, back to our orientation, the gauge needs to be facing 6 o'clock, and we want to have the face running horizontal across the face between the 9 and the 3 is our setup position here. There again, I will give you a wrench along with it, but we're going to get this finger tight. And then you may need, just another quarter, half turn. That is more than enough. If this isn't easily rotating by hand, then it's plenty tight. So that's step 1. Step 2 is we're going to get the entire controller. This all comes pre-assembled. It's going to look much like this when you first get it. This is our controller box. This is where all of our electronics are housed. This is weather resistant. Just as the heads up, it is not waterproof. So if it gets splashed with coolant, if you wipe it down with water, it's not going to hurt it. Do your best not to submerge this though, because you will be calling me and need a new box at that point. So first steps here, just get the wires kind of all unwound, straightened out. If this is all twisted around or whatnot, just get everything so there's free movement, basically. We don't want this twist and intertwined it on itself in any way, shape, or form. And what we're going to do is we're going to, again, same setup as the gauge. There's a nut and washer here. Again, another sealing O-ring. They are the same size as the gauge. So again, if this ever needs replacement, you have a couple extras. And this is going to be dropped into the 3 o'clock hole. Now the orientation is not vital here, but to me, what works best is this flare fitting. This is where the vacuum pump actually attaches. That's going to point towards 6 o'clock position. The solenoid, this is what's controlling all of the vacuum flow through the unit, is going to point outwards to 3 o'clock. This filter assembly is going to be pointing vertically, just towards the camera at this point, but into the sky when it's being used. So again, flip over, and we're going to do the same assembly, washer and nut. Hold the top side by hand to make sure it's in the orientation you want. Again, we may need just a quarter, half turn. That's more than enough to keep it tight. So that's basically our initial setup of the gauge and the valve. Another note on the gauge, you're going to see, as you're looking at it here on the very top, there is a nipple. That is for different atmospheric conditions. So basically, if we were in Denver versus where I'm at in Cincinnati, you're going to have different pressures. That's going to influence how this gauge is reading. The instructions on the gauge say cut this nipple open, and that's going to help the gauge equalize those different pressures. My advice is don't do that. For our purposes, this is an inexpensive gauge. It's not lab grade. I've checked against a digital HVAC gauge. It's accurate within an inch and a half. By cutting this nipple though, you're going to let all that glycerin that's inside leak out if you ever tip this over, if you want to store it or otherwise. Again, for our purposes, this gauge accuracy is not super important. It's more just a show what's going on inside type of item. So You can cut it if you want. It's going to read more accurately, but my suggestion, just so it does not make a mess, is leave be. So at this point, we're going to take our controller. We want to, again, twist all these wires around. The goal is we want to have the wires facing the valves here, not twisted. They're going to be underneath. And we want it so that we can rotate our two status lights up and over the gauge face. So it's going to look like this as you're facing it forward. Again, I just don't want the wires bound up or otherwise. This is a pre-production unit, so I haven't applied it yet. There will be a pad of double-sided tape on the back of the gauge face. It's going to have a red film on it. You're going to go ahead and peel that red film off. The double-sided tape is extremely adhesive. So just make sure as you're doing this that you're lined up, you're where you want to be. So again, wires coming out towards the solenoid side. We're going to put this gauge, or excuse me, put the controller box on top of the lid, and we're going to orient it exactly with the back of the gauge face as such. We don't want it over here or here. It's going to be right here. And then we're just going to slowly compress these two together. So as such, and at that point, they're going to be married. Once you make contact between the controller box and the gauge, this isn't going to move around. It's going to be securely attached. You know, if you're offset a little bit, it's just, will it work? Yes, but now you're going to have sticky, exposed, etc. So nice lined up and on there. And at that point, you are assembled with the lid. So again, that's all we're going to have to do with this at this point. I'm going to move this aside. The next steps are back to our chamber and on this end. And this is a 6AN fitting. What goes directly onto here is one of our series adapters. And I'm going to show you today, this is the Series 5. The Series 2 is exactly the same setup, but these just thread on together. The reason I'm showing you the 5, A, it's a little bit bigger, so it's easier to see. The other reason is it does have an adapter, which is not on the Series 2. This is an 8AN fitting. This is 6, so obviously these don't go together well. So first step, we need to adapt this to the bigger size. You're just going to put it on, thread it on. And as I said before, with the gauge and the valve assembly on top of the lid, this does not have to be super tight. Honestly, that's enough. If you have to put a wrench on it, fine. These are anodized fittings. Putting a wrench on them, you're likely to scratch them up. So you can put some masking tape around the outside if you want. You could, also they sell specific AN wrenches to prevent that. But at most, we're gonna go an 1/8 inch past this point we're at with tooling. Again, it's not necessary. I don't suggest it. It's just wear and tear on the fittings. So that's gonna thread in first. Then our series adapter is going to go on next. Orientation of this, we're probably going to have to move this once it's hooked up in the car. But for now, just kind of 90 degrees or so downwards of whatever that natural kink of the hose is. See, it's kinked this way. Again, once it's there, there's going to be a little bit of rotation that we can do to fine tune things once it's in the car. So that is our setup at this point to kind of see how we're at. And then this is going to go on top. There is no further seal needed or connection points. So our last piece of this puzzle, and this is not necessarily part of the assembly or part of the initial setup, but the last thing you have to do, this is our charging hose. This is physically going to connect to this front flare fitting. This is 1/4 inch SAE. It's kind of a very, very standard size in heating and air conditioning world. Again, that's all the tighter we have to do. Finger tight, no tooling needed. This other end is going to run directly to your vacuum pump. Your vacuum pump will also have a 1/4 inch SAE fitting on it. And that's where the suction is going to come. So that's our initial setup. Thank you for your time, and much appreciated. And I look forward to a couple more videos with you on actually getting this onto the car and functioning.